Well, my father died last Thursday morning. It was July 10th, 2025, and we had the funeral the next day around noon. My brother and I were at his bedside in his final moments in the ICU. He wasn't exactly conscious in his last days, hours. Although his wife and my brother said he was a little responsive or more responsive in the evenings in his last few days. I'm more of a morning guy, and when I saw him, he was, well, in his last 2 days in the ICU, he was just kind of half-lidded and nonverbal and just kind of slowly gesturing with his hands and arms like a marionette. The end was peaceful. My brother happened to arrive a few minutes before the end. I got there about 2 hours before. And it's just, while Boaz and I were talking, I noticed that Dad's previously elevated heart rate up on the monitor, which was, it had been around the 120s. It was in the 150s when I arrived on the previous day because of the meds they had him on to try to keep his blood pressure up. Anyway, his heart rate while we were talking in those first couple minutes dropped down to about 100 and then 90. And I thought maybe it was the digoxin or other stuff they had him on that was bringing it down a little bit, but then it dropped to the 50s and then zeroed out. And a nurse and a doctor raced in. They did what they could, keeping in mind that we said no CPR, no breathing tube. He wouldn't have wanted that. The day before when they moved him into the ICU, the doctor there told me CPR would break all his ribs or break a bunch of his ribs and not have much of a chance of restarting his heart. So we told him to note that. His heart did momentarily recover to like 50 beats a minute. But they said that was just the defibrillator pacemaker he had installed years and years ago doing its job. And within a couple of minutes, he stopped breathing and he was gone. And we were each on the other side of the bed holding his hands through this, the mesh and padding mittens they had to put on him because he kept trying to pull his IV lines out in his confusion. And, well, he would have been glad to know that the pacemaker defibrillator actually worked. It had never fired in all the years that he had it. So the idea that when his heart stopped, it actually tried to jack it back up and get it going is something he would have appreciated, I guess. And I wrote about most of this stuff in my newsletter on Sunday, crying at his bedside, drawing him one last time as he lay there, taking a business call about 75 minutes after his death, the race to find and buy a burial plot so we could have the funeral on Friday. And then Thursday afternoon, got home, hit up friends about the funeral in case they could come, and then wrote the eulogy the next morning and all that. I did have a business trip set for Thursday night into Friday down at FDA. And I'll say in the midst of all this stuff, when I got home Thursday afternoon after texting all these people and prepping my newsletter for the next morning for work, I called the Courtyard Marriott in Silver Spring, White Oak, and told them that I would not be using that day's reservation because of my father's death. I would be keeping the Sunday night reservation for the other FDA event that I had. And I knew Thursday was non-refundable, and I was just telling them that they could release the room if they needed to. I understood they were going to charge me for it, but they were really kind, and they canceled my Sunday appointment, moved the Thursday to that one, and only charged me for one night. So it was a bit of kindness. They understood I was not making up the my father died 3 hours ago thing. But what do I really want to tell you? The funeral went off fine. It was graveside. The rabbi, he tried his best. We all shoveled some dirt into the grave. My uncle, who flew up from Florida the night before, he put Dad's other brother in Israel on FaceTime and held his phone out for the entire ceremony for the prayers and the eulogies, and the showing a little bit of the burial part where we took the 2 shovels and started to cover Dad's coffin. And my brother gave a eulogy before mine, where he spoke very lovingly about a lot of the big life lessons he learned from Dad, and anecdotes about him and things he'll always remember. Then Dad's wife went after me, and she talked about their love and some wonderful and loving moments with his grandkids and all the moments they had together. In between, I talked about my dad as scoundrel, which I'll share with you right now. I'm sorry, the audio's not so great. We had my little portable recorder on battery, and Amy just held that up while I talked. So we're here to celebrate the life of my father, Andre. Well, he was a lot of things. He was a refugee, which kind of defines a lot of who he was, but the rabbi can mention a little about that later. My father was a photographer, wrote some poetry, loved his cars, loved his computers, loved soccer, loved growing orchids for a little while, loved our dogs. As Boaz said, he was a very good grandfather. He really loved having grandkids. Now, in my case, I used to joke that I was less of a son to him than more of a henchman or accomplice. Largely because my father engaged in a lot of never quite legal behavior. That was who he was. If there was a crooked way to do something, illegal, but not straight up. That was where Dad went. I say this as someone who literally rode shotgun with him, and literally, I didn't ride. I sat in a side room with a shotgun while he was selling video equipment to some guys he didn't know. In case anything happens, Gil, ... Nothing happened, and everything went fine. But that's part of the man that we're here to celebrate, along with all the other stuff. And all the ways he touched our lives, criminal or not. Very recently, Amy ended up encountering a friend who knew my father from way back, and it turned out that their marriage, and they're in the corner over there, sort of was a result of being introduced through my dad, and he touched a lot of lives in a lot of different ways. And I've been racking my brains as to how to celebrate Dad's life best and how to honor him and the very expansive memory he left behind. This morning I did pay the rabbi by cash instead of check, which is something Dad did when he got me a Hyundai back in my college years. The dealer said, so you're paying by check, and Dad just plopped down an envelope, and that was Dad. I also thought about tying a whole bunch of fireworks to a couple of bottle rockets and setting that off like my father's brother, and he did, nearly blowing off my foot back when we were kids, but realized that'd probably start a fire here, so that's no good. I also thought about renting a 1978 silver Corvette to drive up here in, which those of you who know my father from way back know how important that is. But I thought about something else and a way to celebrate him and his life in the way that he and I were connected. See, in his last bunch of years, the henchman thing sort of gave way to wheelman. I was more the driver for him. For a lot of these times, most of the times we got together were to take him to medical appointments or hospitalizations. And that meant riding 208 to 4 to 17 to Hackensack. And on a lot of those drives, when we passed the now departed Nabisco plant on the east side of 208, he'd take a deep sniff trying to catch the smell of baked goods. And in the final years, he'd ask about, what happened, why is it being demolished, when's it going to be done, what's coming in its place. But sometimes he'd turn right and he'd look to the west, to Fairlawn Cemetery. And I knew he was thinking about Johnny Bernstein. See, Johnny was a friend of Dad's, and crony's probably a better term than friend in this case. They used to go to these ham radio flea markets, this whole crew of guys. When we were little kids, they'd take us along sometimes. There's all this amateur radio thing. They call them ham fests, and they would go out to Ohio, upstate New York, all these different places, largely to try to sell hot or defective equipment to marks. That was who Dad was. There was other stuff there. There was this old man who used to sell these stripped comic books. So he didn't have the covers, these comics from the 60s. And Dad would give me or Boaz a couple of bucks, and we'd come back with a stack of comics. And that really started a lifelong addiction, affliction, whatever. But he helped us build that habit, not even realizing it. But Johnny died in 1983. He, maybe 38, 40, heart attack. And they buried him in Fairlawn at that cemetery. About a year after the death, when there should have been a headstone up, Dad and I stopped to find the grave on the way back from another comic book run. We found the grave, and so this is 1984, I'm a 13-year-old kid. Stone wasn't up yet, just a marker, and that bothered Dad a lot. He felt like Johnny's wife should have taken care of this, and he was grumbling, and I was just standing there holding our motorcycle helmets, because it's the other thing I could have come riding up in, I guess. And Dad started looking around. And when he realized there was no one here looking at us, he went over to another grave and stole some flowers. And he put them over on Johnny's grave, and he winked at me. And he said, "It's not like that guy's going to notice." And 40 years later, I know that's what Dad was thinking pretty much most of the times we drove down 208, even that last time, about 8 days ago. And I know we've all got our ways of celebrating his memory. For me, the best way to honor him, the thing I think he'd appreciate the most, is if I go over there and steal some flowers and leave them for my father. So, goodbye, Dad, and I love you, and I want to thank all of you guys for coming today. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, that was my eulogy about 25, 26 hours after Dad's death. I do have some commentary to share. The things I want to add on to that I did not necessarily want to get into in the eulogy, and something I learned after. First, that line about the Hyundai, which Dad paid for in cash. The dealer said, "Can I get your check, sir?" And my father opened his briefcase, hauled out this big envelope with $6,000 and said, "Here's your check," and dropped it on the desk. I will say, just as a way of illustrating our relationship, he bought the car for me because he drove me up to college in Western Massachusetts once. It was about 3 hours each way, and I think he decided he had had enough of that and that it would be easier to just buy me a cheap car. He was doing well in those days. That might capture something of our relationship. It was a gift to both of us, I guess. It was a car for me, and not having to spend 6 hours with his son, well, half of that with his son, and half of that, just driving. That's who we were. I think I got across some of that in the eulogy itself. The shotgun story, though, I want to get into that. That is totally true. He handed me this shotgun. He told me to wait in the other room in case anything happens. But there was this long-standing question I had about that, which was finally resolved the day after the funeral. See, I sat there on the bed in the maid's room holding this shotgun, listening to these two guys come in and talk to my father about the video equipment, try to figure out whether they had pulled a piece on him or not, and they did not. And when he said, "Oh, I think I hear my son," I put it down and came in. The thing I had wondered was it loaded? And I never asked Dad whether it was or wasn't. It'd be just like him to, hand me a giant shotgun unloaded in hopes that, just holding it up there would scare these guys out of the house. Alternately, my father expected me to be able to just shoot two people. We'll say somewhat in cold blood. You could say, self-defense, etc. But, I would have been kind of dodgy in court. Anyway, on Saturday, we were helping Dad's wife move some things in the house, and I opened a closet that had the shotgun. carefully took it out, keeping the barrel down and away from me. I pulled back the bolt, and yes, there was a shell in the chamber. I took it out. The chances that he had loaded it any time in the previous 25 years or so is minimal. It's probably been sitting there the entire time. So, yes, I took it out. My brother insisted I take the gun from the house. Yeah, I think he's worried about Dad's wife's frame of mind. I don't think she is having that sort of despair as opposed to grief at losing her husband. But anyway, as I was heading outside to my car, I just pulled the bolt again to look, and I noticed there was another shell in the chamber. Well, I took that out and realized, well, I did this 3 more times, basically. Every time I cocked the bolt and pulled it back, there was another shell in there, from underneath. And I ended up with five shotgun shells sitting there with, and loaded the gun into the back of my car, put the shells in an Eulogy bag that was sitting there, and thought I'll just drive home nice and easy and get back, not have an issue. Anyway, so not only was he thinking I would shoot at 2 men in his foyer, he had me ready for apparently a Tarantino-level protracted shootout with this. So that was my dad. I skipped Father's Day this year. It was mid-June, and I drove up to Yaddo to record with Paul Karasik that day, and then I drove on to Boston for the big bio conference. I don't feel bad. I don't feel bad about missing Dad's last Father's Day. I don't think it really meant much to him, and I'm going to tell you the previous year, 2024's Father's Day, Amy and I picked up a bunch of barbecue, and we asked Dad's wife what we shouldn't get, loaded up on everything, figured we'd bring enough stuff for them to have for a couple of days. We get out to their place and go out on the deck, set everything up. He comes out with the walker, shuffling there, and he sits down, and he turns to me and says, "I have made peace with the world, and I am ready to die." And this is the first words my father said to me on what could have been his last Father's Day, turned out to be his second to last. Once again, it's who we were. I don't know. I don't know what I'm feeling. Today's the first day I haven't had to go anywhere or do anything. Friday was a funeral. Saturday was 4 or 5 hours back at their house, moving stuff, and then dinner with my brother and Dad's wife. Sunday was a 4.5-hour drive to Maryland for this FDA thing. Monday, FDA, and then almost 6 hours to get home. Today was just a couple of business calls with people who know what's gone on and were accommodating. But, I don't know. I thought the drive would devastate me. I thought being alone in a hotel room would bring me face to face with whatever the hell I'm going through, but there was nothing. No breakthroughs, breakdowns, epiphanies, nothing like that. For the drives, I just kind of sang along to new wave and 80s music, talked to my brother for half an hour on the way down, talked to one of my friends on the way back. Same thing, about half an hour. Told some of these stories. On the way down, I passed a couple of places that, we had gone, like Maryland House, the big rest stop. We used to stop there, I guess, on the way to Florida when we'd go down for Thanksgiving when I was a little kid, because they had this comic book vending machine at some of the rest areas. And I remember Maryland House was one of them, maybe Chesapeake House, but I don't recall. But you put it in, it had 3 random comics, sort of bagged together, and they just fell out through the vending machine. And being comic book geeks as children, this was variety galore. And we passed I passed Magnolia, Maryland, and the story about that was on the way back from my brother's college graduation. My brother went to school at American in Washington. We were driving back, me and my dad, and we stopped in Magnolia because we needed to get lunch somewhere, and there was this barbecue joint, and we ordered this rack of ribs. And I swear to God, it was like the ribs in the Flintstones credits, like those gigantic Tyrannosaurus things, almost bent the table in half. And enormous. And Dad would mention this for decades afterwards. You remember the ribs? But I passed it this time, and I smiled. I didn't have sadness exactly. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know why. Maybe I spent so much time being sad or relitigating a lot of the shitty stuff that went on in my entire life. I won't just say my childhood. Dad and I had a fraught relationship, which I think comes out in that eulogy. And there are all sorts of stories I'm not going to tell you because this isn't about score settling or anything. But, all I felt was those were some good and funny moments we had together. On the way home last night, there's traffic out the wazoo. We ended up getting this mega downpour and deluge that I barely missed the flash flooding for, but got caught in a lot of the rain. But anyway, on the way back, there was so much traffic just in the last stretch, like as I'm approaching Paramus, where we just had him buried, that I thought I'd make a side trip to visit his grave, and maybe the traffic would ease up by the time I split. So I did that. There's no sod laid down yet, just dirt and the temporary markers. And I just kind of stood there, just looked at the dirt and wondered what I am supposed to feel, even though I know there is no supposed, and that what I'm talking about isn't special. If we're lucky, our parents die before us. If everyone's lucky, that's the way things are supposed to go. And I know a lot of people have gone through this, and a lot of people have sent me wonderful messages in the last couple of days, talking about their experiences, sending condolences, all sorts of things. And I know what I'm going through is not unique by any means, except it totally is. But there's no talking to the box in the dirt. There was no, hey, Dad, you'd have loved the view from here and all this. I didn't have any of that. I didn't cry. I kind of crouched down and kind of looked at things, and I took a picture of the grave and the big tree behind it. And then that impending storm I was talking about started generating more and more thunder. And, I thought getting caught under a tree in a lightning storm and getting killed might not be the best way to salute my dad. So I left. When I was at the FDA thing on Monday, earlier that day, I was fine. I was there to talk about user fee reauthorization, potential facility fee issues, and my trade association. I could talk my line really well. I was ready to go up during open comments and give my 3-minute spiel. I wrote it that morning with the friend I actually talked to on the way back that day. We put together a really good statement. I made more notes afterwards. Problem was, a couple of the people who were there knew what happened. Like the two guys I had the business call with about 75 minutes after Dad's death, they were there. They came up, and I thought they were going to talk about user fee issues, and instead they asked about how I was doing, as did a couple of FDA people, because I had to miss that Friday meeting, and they knew why and wanted to extend condolences and talk. And the problem wasn't that exactly. It was that I talked about the experience with Dad in pretty much the exact same tone I was talking about user fee reauthorizations, facility fees, and my trade association. I sounded like the exact same person. And that may have disoriented them a little bit. I think they had everybody's grieving in their own way. This is how Gil is handling things, if he is in fact handling things. But it did make me think during the drive, maybe that whole severance concept isn't that bad an idea, where you kind of have that split in the brain where there is a work persona that does not know all the stuff that's going on in the rest of that being's life. But like I say, today I got a few minutes. I'll be diving back into the work. I've already started responding to emails from the past week, and I've been playing the dad card with people who, hey, we haven't heard from you yet. I'm like, well, my father died last week, and boom, that just kind of shuts everybody up. But I don't think it's just the last week. It's been months of, if not years, of anxiety and at least a background strain of his health decline and cognitive decline and everything else, and what's going to come after and all that. That's just been part of my life for I'll say the last 20 years, but particularly the last couple of years. What hit me partly during the drive when I was remembering those moments, and especially when I was at his grave, is that we all become just a collection of memories. We're gone, and the memories are left. They're stories for other people to tell. The day before he died, I visited one of my dad's girlfriends from the 1980s to let her know. I remember where she worked, figured maybe she still worked there. I stopped on the way from the hospital to home, and she was sad. She was glad that I came to her to tell her all this stuff because they had a special relationship. And we reminisced about some things. And she reminded me about the surprise party she threw for my dad on his 50th birthday at this restaurant in Tuxedo, New York. And I hadn't thought of that event in a bazillion years. But the moment she mentioned it, I said, of course I remember that because I left with my friend Jen. I was 17 when Dad was 50, and a friend from high school, Jen, she came with me, and I'd just gotten my license a month before. It's February, Dad's birthday, so it's really cold out, and the windshield in the car had frosted over, and I had the defroster of our Dodge Challenger going full blast trying to clear this, and when I thought it was enough, I finally pulled out onto old Route 17 and started the drive back to town. And Jen said, "Can you even see anything?" And I said, "Sure I can." Through that little hole in the ice right there, just above the vent, and, leaned forward over the steering wheel to look through that while driving us home. And I wouldn't have had that memory had I not gone to see my dad's old girlfriend. And it's very lucky because it turns out she was going on vacation the next day. And if I had waited, A, Dad would have died. B, I would have missed telling her. And then it was meaningful to see her and to talk to someone who knew Dad but hadn't seen him in decades, but still had a lot of stories. There's no supposed, like I said, there are no right words and there are no right feelings. I mentioned in the newsletter, I only really cried, in the ICU when he died. My voice breaks a few times in that eulogy, but that's not the same. I don't know how I'm processing things or whether I am or whether being so busy all the fucking time is keeping me from doing that. But, his loss hits me. But the years that I've spent kind of dealing with that and maybe that's prepared me in some way. Maybe this is going to wreck me in ways I completely don't see. We'll find out. But at his grave yesterday, I wondered if there was anything I left unsaid. No, not that. There's plenty I left unsaid. I wondered if there's anything I should have said. I don't feel like there is. And it's not because we're incredibly open with each other, but because the things that matter to me never meant much to him. Except when I started drawing a few years ago, and some of my photographs he appraised. But we didn't connect. And a lot of the stuff he was interested in, I didn't particularly care about. We didn't rebel against each other exactly, but we just were two very different people. And I was maybe his, like I say, henchman, more than son and wheelman by the end. But, you know, I said everything I needed to say. And maybe I've done that here too.